Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Cookie Jar Golf Podcast, brought to you in partnership with FootJoy. In this episode is part 2 of our look at Old Barnwell. We chatted with Nick last Friday, and this week we're chatting to Brian Schneider and Blake Conant, who are the architects responsible for the development of Old Barnwell. The topography, the land, everything at Old Barnwell is absolutely amazing. What Brian and Blake have managed to achieve there is really something quite special. Brian and Blake are proteges of the infamous Tom Doak, and they share their experiences on acquiring land and routing the course and everything from construction to irrigation to shaping and everything in between. So another great episode for you guys, so sit back and enjoy.
Watch this.
I absolutely loved it. I think you don't really know what to expect, do you, when you sort of walk through, when you sort of turn up at this place. And we played 3 sort of new courses, I guess you could say, in quick succession. So, Old Barnwell, then went down to a hoopy for a few days and then played Tree Farm on the way back. So it's a hell of a trifecta in the area. So anyway, we are joined obviously today by Brian Schneider and Blake Conant. So guys, how do we introduce ourselves? Should we go Brian first?
Yeah, sure.
Let's do that. Brian, tell us about yourself and your role within Old Barnwell.
I'm about 20 years into my career in building golf courses. I spent about 4 or 5 years prior to this working for greenkeepers across America, primarily. That was kind of my way to see a bunch of golf courses more than anything and play a lot of golf. And in the process, learn a little bit about architecture and also learn how to run machinery. So from that, I spent the next 20 years or so working with Tom Doak, working for Tom, all over the world, really. Again, got really lucky to work on some exciting projects in beautiful parts of the world. And more recently, I've begun to kind of take on a little bit more of my own work, primarily restorative consulting work at neat old clubs in America, and a little bit abroad as well. But Old Barnwell was an exciting opportunity for Blake and I to do our first design together, kind of independent of Tom Doak and my partners at Renaissance Golf Design. A few years back, we had designed a golf course together called Stoughton in Michigan, along with Eric Iverson, Brian Slonick, and Don Plasek, my 3 partners at Renaissance. And it fell primarily to Eric and Blake and I to get it built. So I guess that was kind of our first independent project from Tom, but Old Barnwell was just another kind of further step removed from that, and a really great opportunity for Blake and I to work with a fantastic client on a really beautiful piece of land.
Nice. So you guys are sort of kind of obviously work closely on Old Barnwell together. Is that always like a marriage made in heaven, or is it kind of you guys will sort of stick together quite a bit on projects now, or is it just that's just the way it drew with the work that you guys have got on, or how do you guys come to sort of partnering on the design as such versus any other potential combo from the Renaissance group?
Blake's like a barnacle. He was an intern with us a number of years ago. Boy, it's got to be 10, 11 years ago now at Dismal River Club in Nebraska. Blake was one of 7 or 8 interns on that project. And was kind of wrapping up school and available to keep working at the end of that job. So he bounced around with me for a few years at Medina and Hollywood and a few other places, and took to shaping pretty quickly. And we've worked on a lot of projects together since then. And Blake's obviously done a fair bit of work with other people, including Tom and some of my partners at Renaissance. So we've spent a lot of time together over the past 10 or 12 years working on a bunch of different projects. And Nick could probably tell a better story about how he came to choosing the 2 of us to work together. But initially he had reached out to Blake, and Nick lives 10 minutes from me in Charleston. And Blake kind of pointed Nick in my direction when it came to helping Nick find the piece of land that would become Old Barnwell. So it was a matter of convenience as much as anything that Nick and I hooked up. And then Nick enlisted Blake Conant to help him find the right piece of land, and ended up hanging on to us to design the golf courses for him.
Oh, nice. The rest is history. He did say that he'd been to look at something like 50 or 60 sites, and then he said he got you guys out there so excited about this site he'd found, and you were like, yeah, it's not the one, Nick. It's not the one. He was shattered by it. He was absolutely broken, I think. Blake, is your route in, is it kind of similar, completely different, in terms of how you've come to where you are now?
A little different. And that's the cool thing about golf architecture. There's no degree that anybody can get to make you a golf architect. So it's a small industry. It's a tight-knit group of people who all get to know each other after you've been working in the industry for a while. So, Brian's a double major in like molecular biology and biochemistry. I've got a Bachelor of Fine Arts in painting and a master's in landscape architecture. Other guys we've worked with have one semester of college under their belt. So people come from all different backgrounds. And so, yeah, I have the art background, and, that wasn't really going anywhere, and had a chance to think about what I really wanted to do. And landscape architecture has a lot of overlap with concepts and philosophies of golf architecture, just in terms of like site design, land engineering, managing stormwater, things like that. So a lot of golf architects choose landscape architecture as an entryway into the profession. And then once I got into grad school, I started emailing golf architects or calling them up and just asking for advice. It was still on the heels of the recession, so a lot of people were negative. Tom Doak responded to me and actually was very positive. He's his takeaway was like, there's always room for talent, no matter how barren the landscape of the industry looks. So I just kept pestering him for a year and a half. And then that's that second summer of grad school is when I met up with Brian at Dismal River Club. Brian was running the job. I was, holding a rake and shovel. And then you're just kind of cutting your teeth on projects. You're learning, you're jumping from city to city or country to country, and you're learning how to build stuff and how to build stuff in a different style. And then you're seeing other golf courses in the area to sort of like build your lexicon of ideas and of what's cool. What do I like? What do I, why is this good? Why is this not good? From there, just like, being more valuable to guys like Brian or guys like Eric Iverson or Tom Doak of like, hey, you can trust me when you're gone. You want to be back home. It's like being able to handle the job and shape for you and be productive. That's one way a young guy in the industry can sort of provide value to people. And so that's kind of what I did, was just travel around and work and shape and, built up to this, I have a few more consulting clients of my own now and starting to get more work. And then when this opportunity at Old Barnwell came along, it was, to Brian's point, it's like, yeah, if Nick had been from Denver, Colorado, I probably would have reached out to Eric Iverson and said, hey, you should talk with this guy, But we just like working together so much, and we've worked together for such a long time that I didn't think anything of it. It's like, man, there's one of the most brilliant golf architecture minds in the world is like 10 minutes away from you. You should just have a beer with Brian or like go talk with him, And so, yeah, it just made all the sense in the world to like, yeah, let's figure out how to do this together.
Yeah. We'll dive into the course in a minute, but that yin and yang of, whether it's science or whether it's art, I think is fascinating. And I'm not gonna use your line here, Blake, but your website has a wonderful Herb Warren Wind quote, which talks to that. And I suppose you look at, you guys will know a lot more about this than myself, but C.B. McDonald, Seth Rayner, that kind of complement of artistry and science and engineering. Do you feel like you need that in a partnership? Because so much of this is heavy earthworks, large scale engineering, but then the finished product, it has to look beautiful and sit in the landscape, right? So you almost need both bases covered, I guess, don't you?
I think you need all three at certain points in time. Brian is fully capable of all three of those on his own. It's like the best guys in the world. And when I say all three, I mean, it's like that Herbert Warren Wind quote is, what is it? Soul of a golfer, mind of an engineer, and heart of an artist, something along those lines.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
That's what encapsulates the golf architect. So yeah, having some semblance of, okay, the engineering part, the creativity part, and just loving the game of golf and understanding golf on that level. The really good guys, they have all three of those. Maybe one skill set is, you're a little more interested in the creative part and a little less interested in the stormwater management part. But for the most part, as it relates to Old Barnwell, it's like Brian and I overlap pretty well in all three of those areas. And there wasn't any one particular area where it's like, oh, Brian's got to handle all of that because I just don't understand it. Or like Blake's got to do all this part because Brian doesn't, it didn't really work like that.
Yeah. How does the process work? I mean, you guys know, is there like a really clear line of demarcation? Do you have certain areas or, how do you both work? Is it completely, collaborative across everything? Do you have your own little sort of areas that you look after? Like, how do you kind of split it out? And then I guess you must reach some points where you have some quite healthy creative debates as well, don't you?
We arm wrestle over who gets to do the fun stuff.
Yeah, is that right?
And sometimes it just fell to who happened to be on site at a particular time. Like, those first 3 greens are done. We're good on those. I'm going to be there next week. I'll work on these few things. We'll overlap when you get back and I'm leaving. So a lot of it comes down to timing, but we weren't in any way kind of proprietary about any of it, honestly. We both roughed in a lot of the features, the greens, the bunkers, whatever the case is. And we're very open to input from both one another and the other people working on site about how do we feel about this? What can we do to tweak it? I don't really like that part. What do you think we can do there? So it's a very collaborative effort where, when you've got a bunch of talented people on site soliciting their opinions throughout the process and having the time to go away and come back and look at things with fresh eyes was really valuable too. But, that's certainly a lesson we've both learned from working for Tom over the years is, Tom's a brilliant guy. I mean, Tom's as talented an architect as has ever lived, in my opinion. But he's also smart enough to know to surround himself with people that both A, are really passionate about the same things that he cares about, and B, are pretty talented in machines. So he's always been very welcome to letting us get creative and express our own ideas and then have conversations about things and how they evolve and seeking input from talented people on site. So, Blake and I never felt like either one of us or both just the two of us should be doing this alone, that this was our thing. I mean, it was very much a group effort along with Andre Buchko and Gray Carlton, who helped with the shaping on the project, as well as the kind of the members of the staff at Old Barnwell. John Lavelle, who's he's the general manager, but was kind of
I met John
as the director of agronomy. John was hugely helpful in managing stormwater across the property. As you saw, there's a big, deep, broad valley that runs through the middle of the site, and there's a lot of water moving around out there when it rains, and it rains pretty frequently in that part of the country. So we knew we had to keep the water, kind of catch water here and there and steer it around and make sure that it was going where we wanted to go and not too quickly. John was a huge help with that part. He's a really sharp guy. He's got the brain of an engineer that way, and was really determined to make sure that the water was being managed properly. And we provided some artistic input around those things. And at the same time, Blake and I love seeing new golf courses. We travel around a lot. We make the time to see other golf courses when we travel. And you see a lot of old golf courses where, water was managed very crudely, but that's kind of a neat aesthetic, whether it's a ditch or a berm, but it's just something very functional. Sunningdale Old is loaded with that sort of thing. These ditches and berms all over the property for moving water around or catching water or lowering the water table, whatever the case is. And Willie Park didn't make a huge effort to hide that stuff. He did it as quickly and efficiently as possible. And now you walk around it and it's covered with heather and it's lumpy and very organic looking. And that's really cool. So there are a lot of instances at Old Barnwell where we're moving water, but we also didn't make a huge effort to try and hide it. We let it be kind of rudimentary and stylistically, we weren't trying to make that work disappear. So that's kind of something different than a lot of what we've done with Tom over the years. And to get back to your point earlier, I mean, there are several different aspects of what people who build golf courses do. And I think, Pete Dye is attributed the quote about, golf course architecture is 95% making drainage look good. And I think he overstates that a little bit, but it also stresses the importance of making sure that the golf course functions really well and will be sustainable. And then how you choose to dress up, how you're moving water around is a choice that all architects have. And we chose to apply kind of a different aesthetic to that than we've done in the past, and to create something a little distinctive in the process.
Yeah, well, you touched on it there, Brian. I mean, the distinctive, it really is very distinctive, isn't it? I think it's a very different aesthetic to a lot of the golf courses that, it feels really different, and I mean that in a good way. I'm really curious. So when you guys got together then, so sort of started the project, you're looking for sites. What does that process look like coming right through to a point of this is our ethos or this is what we're thinking? I mean, Nick, maybe Nick's overstating it, but he sort of said, look, I really stood back from Brian and Blake and let them work their magic with the rest of the team on the golf course. I'm sure lots of proprietors have said that and probably been far from the truth, but I got the sense that Nick meant it. Do you come to a point of saying, well, this is the ethos of what we think we want to build as a golf course? Or do you find the site and then say, okay, well, I think this is what we're going to have to make this look like, and this is how we're going to try and work with the land? What kind of comes first? Do you have a brief in your mind about, actually this is going to be about, playability, or this is going to be about really kind of making provocative greens? So what sort of things are going through your head before you sort of start to break ground on it, really?
We were, Nick was really good at finding soil maps. The number one most important thing to us is having good soil. Part of the reason why Aiken is so appealing is there's that ancient sand belt that basically runs from Highway 1 all the way down, from Pinehurst all the way through Georgia. So there's no point to build a really cool golf course on clay. That's hard to do, and that would defeat the purpose of wanting to be down there in the first place. So finding
Bobby Jones would disagree, but that's right.
Yeah, that's true.
With enough money, you can fix anything, can't you? That's the thing.
Yeah,
Augusta's a sandy site now.
Yeah, they've gone to the effort of capping it, haven't they? But then looking at topo maps, and once we found something, it's like, okay, this sand profile is pretty good, and the topo looks like you could build something cool on it. It's probably worth going to, fly down and check it out before you pull the trigger. And Brian we both went and saw a property with Nick that I think Nick really liked, but Brian and I could only find about 6 or 7 cool golf holes. And then Brian went and looked at a property with Nick that was stunning from what I understand, but it was just like, it was for sale, but it wasn't really for sale. And then they went and saw Old Barnwell, and it was, Brian called from the site and just said, I think this is really good. I'd already seen the topo. We'd seen the soil maps. And I don't remember, Brian, if we had like stylistic discussions at that point of like, hey, we really want to do like a Heathland golf course, or if we were more just like, let's find a good piece of land with good soil and sort of then see what we think afterwards. I think it was more the latter, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I don't recall talking too much about what kind of golf course we wanted to build until we started working through the routing. And, again, water management plays a big part of that. But we spent a lot of time on the routing. And again, thankfully, we had a lot of time to spend. But the details start to evolve as you start building golf holes. And I don't know that we necessarily went in with any preconceived ideas of what we wanted to look like. The more time we spent out there, again, it's a sandy site with some pretty big elevation changes. So it did remind us of, St. George's Hill and Sunningdale and places like that. Pine Valley to a certain degree, though it's not quite as up and down. But, there's been a lot of work in sandy sites over the last 20, 30 years. And so many new developments have kind of gone the direction of Pine Valley or something with these, big sand scrapes, and, where sand is a really important aesthetic part of the golf course, as opposed to just, all the great things that come from having sandy soil. And, it's getting to the point where it's hard to separate yourselves if you're going to big sandy waste areas. A lot of people have done that, and a lot of people have done that really, really well. So we didn't make an effort to hide the fact that it's a sandy site, but at the same time, we didn't want to make that an important part of the aesthetic. We thought that's been done. That's been done very well. Let's try and go in a different direction and do something that might set us apart a little bit. And that's where some of the aesthetic decisions started coming into play as we started building.
Yeah, it's a good segue that. I mean, it's quite striking, isn't it? Particularly the bunkers and the shaping around the greens. It's really striking because it does feel, I mean, everything feels very different when you play golf in America, when you're used to playing a lot of golden age courses in England, and everything's bigger, and it's, I think, just the scale of the property itself is enormous. So, there's that whole aspect to it. But I guess the aesthetic of the bunkers, felt strikingly different. I don't know whether there was shades of like some sort of Victorian steeplechase bunkering that I saw on one thing up towards up around the sort of first fairway and the 18th. Some of it's quite angular. Is there a certain look or certain things that were inspiring you both in terms of how you wanted these things to look and feel? Because they are striking, very, very striking.
Yeah, there's a lot of variety out there, but I think it starts with more how we want them to play. And one of the things that we don't necessarily love about the big sand scrapes that a lot of people are doing is that more often than not, it's a pretty easy recovery. The bigger the bunker it is, the more likely you are to end up in the middle of the bunker, far removed from any sort of lip, and you can hit a 3-wood out if you want to. We didn't want that to be the case with a lot of our fairway bunkers. Old Barnwell's a big golf course. There's a lot of room to play, and there are quite a few bunkers out there. But at the same time, many of the bunkers are pretty small and pretty deep. And that's where the bunker aesthetic started, was the playability. We want these to be nasty. We want we want there to be a 50-50 chance that if you end up in this bunker or this set of bunkers, you're going to have a crappy lie and you might have to hit a wedge out. Oh. That's been lost a little bit, I think, in modern American golf architecture. It's rare to see bunkers where it's like, wow, that's a half stroke penalty. I'm not getting anywhere near that. And we want to make sure that the bunkers were really impactful that way. So it started more with depth and size than what they're going to look like. And if you're going to make a bunker really deep and kind of small, the face is going to have to be fairly steep, and generally sodding down the face in a case like that is going to be a little less maintenance than if you've got high, steep sand faces. And we really love the bunkers at Myopia Hunt Club and Garden City and Woodall Spa. Mm-hmm. So we started to lean into that aesthetic, after we kind of settled on the severity of the bunkers, which is something that visitors will find. The bunkers, you can get bad lies in the bunkers, and we're not apologetic about that at all. I mean, that to us is an important feature of the bunkering at Old Barnwell, that you've got 60 yards of fairway. If you want to play up the right side of the third hole, you're going to flirt with a really bad lie in the bunkers. Yeah. But if the pin's back left, you want to be over there. So there's a risk in trying to get that angle, or to shorten the hole on some of the dog legs and that kind of thing. But we wanted the bunkers to be meaningful, as opposed to just smash a driver out there anywhere, whether you end up in sand or fairway. A lot of courses you can still hit whatever club you want. We didn't want that to be the case necessarily.
Yeah, it is fascinating because you see, when you look at a lot of golf courses, particularly, Instagram generation, we scroll, we look, we watch things on YouTube. And, when you don't play a lot of golf courses, certainly when you're not exposed to playing lots of, fairly modern golf courses, you look at it and think, God, there's this huge trend. It's all very wide. It's all about width and angles and the old course. And, obviously there's huge merit in that. But sometimes you worry, it feels like it's just width for width's sake, and it's just a case of wailing on driver. And I think it's quite hard to create the severity or the the sort of punishment of being out of position. But then when you're sort of played, I think we're sort of walking down, I think the 7th, a wonderful golf hole because, actually, it's, every hole up to that point kind of sort of underlines this. But it's wide open, but the targets feel exceptionally small when you play them. You know, that first tee shot, I think I found the sand off the first tee, and I was playing for position. You know, you're trying to sort of, you're playing into quite a sort of choked area if you want to advance it far up there. Wind was behind. I'm not saying I'm a big hitter by any stretch, but you're out of position and you pay the penalty for it. So I thought that was really interesting how, yeah, it's vast, like it's wide open, but actually the targets felt exceptionally small. So I'm guessing that was all kind of very intentional, that you, I suppose, want to create that. You know, third's a great example. You know, you want to be thinking about where you need to play in from, but there's a penalty attached to going too aggressively on a certain line, right?
Yeah. And we, you know, a couple of things to that too. You know, if you just think in terms of like corridors, for us, we've got 60-yard wide fairways from native to native. You know, fairway bleeds right out into native. On a parkland golf course, that may be a 30 or 40-yard wide fairway and then 10 to 15 yards of rough on either side, but your corridor is still 60 yards. So we're sort of living in that parameter too. It's a pick your poison on how you want to transition out to what the native landscape is. And then for us, we had a lot of big, broad slopes. We don't have a lot of like choppy up and down contour, but we have a lot of big, broad slopes that we wanted to use for the strategy. So like the 12th hole, the right side of it is basically hanging off into that valley, going from 2% to 4% to 6%. And if your ball is right of the center line, it's just going to keep carrying further right and further kind of out of position. And if you hedge left, you'll stay up top, but you'll have a worse angle into the green. So really trying to, like, if you think of the golfer wants three things, he wants, you know, visibility, a good stance, and a good angle. It's like only trying to give them two out of those three in any one time. You know, it's like, hey, if you want the good angle, it may be a blind shot, or, you know, if you want a good stance, it's not going to be a good angle. So trying to do things like that, which that necessitates a wider corridor. You know, we want that ball to be able to run out, but we want it to still end in turf. We don't want people running into native grass all the time. When they're hitting their tee shot on 12, for instance.
Yeah, 12's a great example. You know, you can see it, can't you? You can see the hole wide open across out to the right, and you see it's a great view. I mean, 11's a beautiful par 3. I think it's, you know, I think I said to Nick, it's almost like a sort of a round tree sketch, that par 3, and then you play back up, and you can just see it. You can just see the mounding left of the green. You're like, well, there's just no point going left here. If you want to get on that green in 2, there's just absolutely no way you can play up the left. So it forces you down that right, which is a more uncomfortable shot, because you feel like you're playing on almost towards a cliff edge. Really, it's it's really cool. I guess there's an element where certainly over in this country we see is that, you know, courses that were designed perhaps 100 years ago would have been configured such so that the shapes and the contours versus the equipment and the distance the ball was traveling back then dictated a strategy. But now we're in a world of the ball's traveling much further. You know, the average golfer's coming into a lot of holes with wedge in their hand, and you start to lose some of that strategy, because it's like, I can still stop a wedge on a front to back green perhaps, or on a certain parcel of the green. You know, do you have to almost sort of turn the severity up building today so that it almost brings that strategy back in a little bit? Is that, I don't know, is that like an intentional thing? Is that right? Do you feel like we almost have to turn it up a little bit more now on the contours because the equipment's so good, the ball's traveling further? It almost has to be a bit more to stay, I don't know, stay relevant's not the right point, but do you get what I'm sort of driving at?
Yeah, and you know, we approach that three ways really. I mean, the severity of the bunkering is one of them, and again, we like width for all the reasons that wide fairways are a good thing. You know, finding your ball and playing quickly being one of the most important parts of that. But width for width's sake, you know, if you don't have some sort of severity around the greens, then oftentimes you can drive it anywhere and there's no penalty for hitting it to the wrong spot. You know, so we did make sure that the greens and certain hole locations reward hitting to the right part of the fairway. You know, and you've got a bunch of room to play with 2 off the tee, there should be some sort of incentive to find some certain part of the fairway. And that starts at the greens, having severe slope or severe contour or bunkering the greens in a severe way, at least on one side, is going to favor an approach that's coming in from one place rather than another. And, there are a lot of holes at Old Barnwell where, the fairway is 60 yards wide from tee to green almost. But there are quite a few holes where we use contour to Blake's point, and the 12th is a good example. But we use contour as a penalty where if you want to drive, if you want to hit it 300 yards, your ball's going to catch this slope, and that slope is going to push you into a tougher angle into the green, or you're going to be blind from over there, or both. So we use big contour in the fairways. When we were routing the golf course, a lot of the holes were laid out in a way that the further you drive it, the tougher either your angle into the green, or the ball is going to be 8 inches below your feet or 8 inches above your feet. So we tried to use contour and big slope in the landing areas, and especially beyond where the average guy is hitting it, to make those holes trickier. So the 12th is an example. If you drive it 320 yards, your ball is going to slide to the right. There's a big bunker on your second shot you need to carry that's going to block your view of the green, and the ball is going to be well below your feet. So you've got a fade lie in a place where you'd ideally like to hit a straight ball or even a draw. So we tried to use the big contour in the fairways to really tighten things up for big hitters without narrowing the fairways or having a bunch of rough or using bunkers to close off your route. We tried to use fairway and slope or contour and slope to help mitigate how far you might want to drive it on most of the holes.
Yeah, I feel like 10 and 13 also kind of fit in that. So like when you say that, it's like, oh yeah, I can see that now. 10, you can try and drive it down there a decent way if you've got the length to, but actually it's kind of a law of diminishing returns, isn't it? You go so far out right, and then you're sort of playing almost down the slope towards the green, when actually there's probably an optimal number off the tee, which is probably not that far, which opens up a more forgiving angle to approach the green. It eliminates some of the jeopardy with the bunkering that's all the way down the left. That's very well disguised, I will add. Yeah, and 13 again, 13 was just like, I think that was one where we all came off that having made complete fools of ourselves, thinking, God, I'd do that a bit differently if I had my time again. And I think that's the essence of good design, right? You want to come off 18. You want to be like, God, I just want to get back out there and try that again, because it wasn't the execution. It was the decisions I made. Like I played to the wrong spots and it caught me out. And I think that's the addictive part of this, right? I'm sure you guys see that a little bit.
Yeah, there's one element of strategy in general. When a lot of golfers talk about strategy, most of the time they mean risk reward. It's like, if you can carry this bunker, then you've got a better green or whatever the case is. And a few holes like that are fine. But if you do that over and over and over, you're just consistently rewarding the player that can hit it really far, because they can make the longest carry. And not only do they have a shorter shot into the green, but you're also giving them the better angle. And to me, or to us, the most interesting holes are those where you've got a choice to make. It's like, I can hit driver here and I can leave myself a wedge, but boy, that's a really tough angle from over there. It's hard to hold the green or hard to get near that pin. Or I can choose to play a shorter club off the tee. I'm going to have 3 more clubs into the green, but it's a much simpler angle from over here. And if that changes from day to day based on hole location, that's even better. But those are the most interesting holes, I think, the ones where you've got a few options. None of them are straightforward or the obvious choice. But you've got the option to choose the choice you're most comfortable with and to attack the hole your way, whereas your opponent might want to play it completely differently.
Do you see that as well, Blake? Is that sort of like stuff that I suppose you both played a lot of golf courses for inspiration as well. You guys must have played, I remember Clyde telling us the ones who played 750 golf courses, and he's just got such a ridiculous knowledge. I guess you draw on a lot of these bits of inspiration from holes you've seen and on your travels, right? And you try and build some of that in along the way.
Yeah. And, it's funny, the more it's like we talk about 12 or 10 or 13 at Old Barnwell. Brian and I both love the 6th hole at Seminole. And I think that concept is something that's sort of timeless. Of the further you want to drive, the narrower the landing area gets. And you're not necessarily going to be penalized with a bunker on either side, but it's just at 6 at Seminole, it just slides your ball further down to the right and makes your angle that much worse, and you're that much more blind as well.
That fairway starts
it's just
out.
like,
relatively level. And the further, the closer you get to the green, the steeper the slope of the fairway gets, to the point where if you want to hit a 320, you're going to end up in the right rough, and the green's really shallow from that angle.
And that's just such a timeless way to not create such a huge advantage for the long hitter, because the guy who hits at 260, the big hitter could hit hybrid or 3-wood and lay back to that area where it's wider. But if he wants to get the advantage of his distance, he's got to be that much more exacting. And so certainly not wanting to take the driver out of anybody's hands, but just make them think about it, like, hey, if you're uncomfortable, if there's a crosswind and you don't think you can hit it into this little 25-yard neck, then you can lay back to the 40-yard neck and hit your hybrid or 3-wood. So I see that as, I think Old Barnwell, a lot of, I've heard your take pretty consistently of like, man, I want another go around because I think I would play XYZ hole differently. And I hope it doesn't turn into, I'd play it differently, but now I have a stock answer. Maybe it's like, today the wind's down, I'm going to try to lay back. But if the wind is a crosswind or, into me, like, I'm going to hit driver. So every day the golf course feels fresh and you're trying something, it's not getting stale and you're not just hitting the same club for 20 straight years,
Yeah, you can play it differently, can't you? Like, you might want to try something. You want to go out and you just want to I would be really interested to see how I get on too if I just took a 6-iron up the left and then hit a wedge in, rather than leave myself a knee knocking chip from 40 yards or whatever. And there's so many of those holes where you can just approach it completely differently. You touched on the bowl at the start, Brian. That's obviously like quite a big feature in the land, is that sort of big dip. Do you pretty regularly, when you're dealing with these things, have big natural landforms where you think, oh, that's, because I guess that's the defining feature of I suppose that's the real beauty of how well you've built the golf course, is how you deal with, that large depression in the land that sort of runs across there, right? Did that take a lot of thinking to get around?
It did. Yeah, it did. I mean, the property is, I essentially, I think of it essentially as, higher plateau on either side of this big valley that runs through the center of the site. And we knew pretty early on that we didn't want to be going up and down and up and down, in and out of the valley. It was really important to us to make the golf course walkable. And despite having a good bit of elevation change, I think we've succeeded in keeping the routing pretty tight. The green to tee walks are both relatively short and, for the most part, relatively flat or even a little bit downhill, with a couple of exceptions. But we wanted to make sure the golf course was walkable. So that played into the routing, how we managed that big valley. And, the sixth hole is one that we found pretty early on when we were first out on the property together. I mean, that one just stood out. Boy, it's, you're hitting it 50 or 60 feet downhill into this big broad valley with a beautiful view beyond. That looks like a cool hole. That's something people like to play. But once we committed to playing into the valley, we had to get to the other side of the valley, because there's 6 or 7 or 8 holes over there in some really nice land. And then you had to get back across. And there was no easy way to play across that with one shot to get from one side of the valley to the other. And that's where the 16th hole played in. We've done enough work with Tom over the years where, he's brilliant at routing, and so many of his routings have 14 or 15 or 17 holes where you don't have to do anything. And there's 1 or 2 or 3 where you've got to blow up the world and make those holes work to make everything else as easy to build as possible. And we've got, 16 is really that hole at Old Barnwell. Because you were playing, you kind of played to the top of the property and you're working your way back to the clubhouse through the valley, which meant, a tee shot on top of the hill that plunges 50 or 60 feet down to the second landing area. And then the next hole is 60 feet above you. So, we committed to kind of benching the 16th green site to the side of a hill and lifting up the fairway a fair bit. So we took that 60-foot climb, split it in half. So you're climbing 15 or 20 feet to the green, and another 10 or 12 feet to the next tee. And then that hole plays another 10 or 12 feet up the hill. So instead of climbing 60 feet out of the valley, we broke that up into 3 smaller climbs along the way. And that took a while to figure out. And that was a commitment to moving a bunch of earth on the 16th hole, at least the second half. The tee shot or the first 400 yards of that hole are almost entirely natural, but there's a lot of earthwork on the last 120 yards.
Yeah, but that, I suppose,
to be fair to Brian, it took him a relatively short amount of time to figure out, and then it took me like a month to come around to the idea that actually, it would work, and this is a good solution. So I think he had it squared away pretty quickly. It was me dragging my feet on committing to it that took the time.
It was the scale of the earthworks. Is that right, Blake? It was like, you've got to be kidding if you want to move that much earth.
It's just like, how the hell is this going to work? And Brian's like, actually, it's going to be a really cool golf hole. Like, don't worry about it. And
it's also not just where you put the earth, is it? Like, also you've got to take it from somewhere. Like, if you look at, what we had a really good historian on the pod who says, like, you look at a lot of golden age courses and you can always see borrow pits where they borrowed a bit of earth, and it's quite obvious. And you then extrapolate that out to the scale of somewhere like Old Barnwell, and you're like, crikey, if we move that amount of earth around, it's also really hard to hide it, I'm guessing, elsewhere on the property as to where it came from, right?
That was pretty easy, actually. The 17th tee used to be the height of the fifth green, and we had to create the 17th tee, which, in warm season grasses, you're going to have dormant grass for 4 to 6 months. And so your par 3 tees need to be big because the grass isn't regrowing, and that's when everybody plays. So divots are going to be taken. So we knew we had to generate a bunch of cut, but B, we had to build a huge flat pad up there. So a ton of dirt came from lowering that huge tee 5 or 6 feet and just shoving it down the hill to create the pad for 16 green. And then I think we imported a lot of dirt from beneath the green, on the left side. So it was pretty locally gathered in that area to generate the fill needed to lift up 16 approach. But, half of it might have been cutting and pushing downhill, and the other half was just sort of trucking in from, a little low that was already there just to the left of the green.
Got you. Okay, cool. Well, I mean,
that entire valley obviously was attractive to us for a number of reasons. But the problem with that valley from the approach on 16 to the green on number 7 was that it was almost dead flat. So it looked really nice. Like, we could have built beautiful golf holes there, but it didn't surface drain at all. So, again, the big valley collects nearly all the water from the site. So A, we were going to have a lot of water there, and B, it wasn't moving at all. So, pretty early on, in addition to doing a lot of earthwork on 16, we had to commit to some really big earthwork on 6 and 7 to make sure that, again, managing water and to make sure that those holes were actually dry enough to play golf on. So there was a lot of cut and fill through that valley from top to bottom. And, generally we don't like building a bunch of catch basins in a fairway. One of the options is just put some contour in the fairway and
how
put
do you
a little
mean
drain
catch
in the bottom of every.
basins? What do you mean? Just sort of like
drains, putting pipe in the fairway with drains that collect the water and take it away. We don't like having those things in fairway because A, it tends to be a little soggy around them, and B, that's where all the balls collect and you get a bunch of divots. And so generally, if we're going to catch water in pipe, we prefer to do it in the rough and off the edges of the golf holes. So rather than creating a bunch of little pockets and grabbing water in fairway, we committed to building a couple of really big, deep holes and then lifting the fairways up to surface drain to those deep blows. So I don't know that we have any catch basins in the fairways on those holes, but we did do a lot of earthwork to make sure that we could get the water off the fairways and catch it in the roughs. And at the same time, create a fair bit of topography on all 3 of those holes.
We don't
there's a big hill in the middle of the 6th fairway that's probably over 20 feet of fill.
Yeah. And we don't see stacks of the sort of, like you say, catch basins, because we just, there's not as much of them, certainly on some of the older golf courses. But when you watch the PGA Tour, they're a bit of a blight, aren't they? You see that, the ball runs off the green, it almost invariably, because that's the way you've got to build it. The ball naturally collects down there. As you say, I can imagine it's soggy, heavy grass. You've taken relief from it. It's kind of, yeah. So I suppose it's quite interesting. One of the things I was thinking about before this podcast was, more recently, for the better, we would probably all argue, is we're building, you're building a lot of golf courses for enjoyment, private developments. We're not building so much for tournament play now. In fact, I don't know. You guys will probably completely fox me on this and say, well, actually, we are building X, or people are building X, Y, and Z for tournament play. But does it feel like that whole sort of phase of 80s, 90s build for tournament play, with a few exceptions like Ryder Cup and stuff like that, does it feel like those days are gone? Is it just like a phase that'll come back again in due course? I don't know.
It's funny, 30 years ago, it seemed like slope was a really important thing to American golfers. It's like, oh, you've heard about that new golf course they're building in Michigan. The slope is 148. Like, that was a popular thing to talk about because people were really concerned about how difficult it was and how long it was too. It's like, oh, is it over 7,000 yards? If it's not, then I'm not interested, And I don't know if that started with, the original Golf Digest rankings, which were, it wasn't a ranking of the best golf courses in America. It was a ranking of the hardest golf courses in America. And Golf Digest hung on to that as a criteria for a really long time. So their list of the best courses heavily favored really difficult golf courses and not necessarily those which are a lot of fun to play. I do think that's changed pretty dramatically. To Bill Coore and Tom Doak and a lot of the work they did starting 25, 30 years ago was very much centered on building fun golf and not necessarily long, not penal, wider fairways, the kind of golf that people really seem to enjoy. And that's definitely caught on. And Mike Kaiser and the Kaiser family play a huge role in that too, in popularizing golf that's just fun to play, playable. You can get around quickly, but it's also really engaging. It's challenging, but in a different way. So the model has changed dramatically in the last couple decades, certainly.
It's so strange, isn't it, that word of difficulty? Like we did a podcast before the end of last year. We looked back at a few episodes of Shell's Wonderful World of Golf, which is obviously great. And in there we've got the Byron Nelson Gene, the match at Pine Valley. And throughout the whole episode, the only thing Pine Valley is just held as an absolute gold standard, but not because it's the best golf course, but because it's the hardest. It's the hardest golf course. It's the toughest test of golf in the United States.
It might be both.
Yeah, it may well be, but it's interesting how at the time that was exactly how it was positioned, was around difficulty, and now it definitely wouldn't be. People who played it and talk about it, it's known as a difficult golf course for sure, but it's just interesting how that's sort of ceased to be the sort of gold standard. We have obviously, as you'll know, a sort of a primarily British listenership. I'm sure if I was listening to this in the car, I'd be really curious to know some of your favourites from your travels over to the British Isles. I don't know if there's any that have sort of maybe influenced the project a little bit at Barnwell, or some of the more recent designs that you're working on and restorations. Do you guys have any that sort of stick in your mind as being particularly sort of thought-provoking?
It'd be a long list.
Brian's seen a ton.
We're fortunate to have spent a lot of time over there over the years. And, Blake and I came over, we've got a member at Old Barnwell who's also a member of Rye Golf Club, I
met him at the Wilcox.
Yeah, he's a terrific guy, Craig.
Yep.
And Craig arranged earlier, I guess it was July of last year, I believe he arranged a match between Old Barnwell and Rye, and hopefully we'll host them in South Carolina this year. But a small group of us from Old Barnwell went over, including Blake and I and Nick, and got to play Rye for a couple days and play alternate shot and everything that comes with playing golf at Rye, which is really hard to beat. The entire experience was amazing. And that's one of my favorite golf courses in the world. So to spend a couple days there was such a treat. But we went over early and stayed a little late. And, I think we saw another 8 or 10 or 12 golf courses on that trip. And, we'd already seen a bunch of golf in the UK, but you can't run out of places, especially around London and south of London. Like, you can't run out of cool golf courses to see over there. And oftentimes the ones that are most influential in what you're building now are the ones you saw most recently. The things that, man, that was really cool. What we saw a month ago, it's still fresh in your head and you can't wait to build something like that. So there are a bunch of those from that trip, certainly. But then there are places like, obviously, the Old Course and North Berwick is another favorite of ours. And there's a long list of places that never leave your head. That anytime you're building golf, the Old Course is always right there front and center. And to me, North Berwick is another one of those, and Muirfield and Dornick, and the list goes on and on. And it's, the difference between the best golf you have in the UK and the best golf we have over here is conditioning and climate. And it's just really hard to get links-like conditions in the United States in most cases. And in the architecture, the two are so intertwined, the architecture and the presentation, that, building the same things in soft, squishy turf just doesn't hit the same way. We're really fortunate at Old Barnwell that we're dealing with Bermuda grass on sandy soil, and it can play really firm, and the ball can run. And our greenkeepers, Chase Watson and Davis Werner and everyone on their crews are 100% committed to only watering they have to, not fertilizing unless they absolutely need to, and they are committed to firm and fast. And that certainly influences the type of things you can build. Knowing that it's going to play the proper way, that affects the things that we do when we're building the golf course.
And I'll give Brian some credit. One of the cool things on our Rye golf trip was he found an old photo of the Park 3 course at North Foreland.
It's very cool, isn't it?
It's 18 original Tom Simpson greens, which I don't know how many of those exist over there, but I mean, that's the kind of stuff that's like 18 Tom Simpson greens on 13 acres, and great, the grassing lines aren't where they should be. Some of the bunkers aren't restored to what that old photo is, but it works really well for how they use it. And, we played West Sussex, we played St. George's Hill. We played all these great Heathland golf courses that are well known, but sometimes seeing the North Foreland Par 3 course and this little, like, holy shit, I never imagined to come upon this, of all the little hidden gems. That's the stuff that I think both Brian and I get really excited about finding and seeing. And that's one of the real benefits of traveling. And drive the extra hour to go see those 13 acres, and see that set of greens, because it's going to inspire us somewhere down the line. It's like, we'll steal one of those greens on, one of our next few projects. That place is, it's just wild. So that was credit to Brian for finding that old aerial and saying that we needed to go there. But that was really cool to stumble upon.
It's magical, isn't it? I love it. I'm gonna shock you there. Blackwell actually has pretty much 18 original Tom Simpson greens. It's and we was run about sort of just under 100 acres. The more and more I've seen of Tom Simpson's work, you're just like, wow, this stuff's amazing. But North Foreland is, it's a treat. I remember I had really bad, you're laugh at this, I had a bad flare up of gout, and we were staying down in Kent for a few days golf. But I was so desperate to see it, I think I hobbled around with gout and played a loop. And you could just do it endlessly. It's like 13 acres, like you say. It's such a small piece of land, but it's just about as much fun per acre as you can squeeze in. And I don't know whether this is like a bit of a segue into the kids course that you guys are working on, right? In terms of like, this is what's coming next for Old Barnwell. But you look at that and you think, God, that is just such a brilliant way to play golf as a kid. Like, I remember going to, there's a place called the Palace Hotel in Torquay. I used to go there with my parents when I was probably about 7 or 8. And I'd be hitting a 5-wood into the par 3 first that was 110 yards and stuff. But that's where the real sort of magic of golf starts, I think, is on these little par 3 courses, particularly for kids. So you guys are kind of sort of in the build of that right now, or sort of starting to get busy with it, right? I've heard there's been a kids Lido competition run.
Yeah, they're just starting to move some earth, and we'll get ready to shape probably sometime in February. And yeah, North Foreland's a really high bar. If we can pack as much fun into the 20 acres that we have set aside that Foreland did in 13, I think we'll call it a success. There's some really, short courses are a big thing over here in the States. A lot of the resorts have really high-end short courses. Part of it is that, like you and I were talking before we came on, it's like, it's the time of year where you may not be able to squeeze 36 in if you've got a 10 a.m. tee time, but it's something fun to do at the end of the day or before your tee time, and you're still playing golf. And when they're done at a really high level, they're really fun to play. So, we hope the kids course at Old Barnwell, it's a gateway for families to get into the game, to enjoy the game together, for kids to get into the game, for beginners to get into the game, but also just as something really fun to do. Fun, if you don't want to go play another 18, like that's the place where you can, have a lot of fun playing golf still.
And the kids course is very much inspired by UK roots, that we got to spend some time in Gullen and North Berwick years ago while building the Renaissance Club. And both North Berwick and Gullen have kids golf courses.
Yeah.
And particularly the one in North Berwick's really cool looking. I mean, it's on bona fide linksland, it's roly-poly. But if the three of us want to play, you've got to be with a kid. We couldn't just go out there and pony up our 10 pounds and go play. You've got to be escorted by a child. And that's the inspiration for the kids course and kids club at North Berwick. We've kind of asked Nick to create a separate club for the kids. They've got their own logo, and we want it to be the kids golf course. And if the grown-ups want to play certain times of the week or certain days of the week, you've got to be escorted by a little person. So there'll be some bribing involved, hopefully, but it's very much geared towards kids' sensibilities, I think. And we're hoping to do some out of the box wild stuff that, if your 8-year-old isn't a golfer, but they want to kick a soccer ball, maybe that's a fun place to go kick a soccer ball around and explore some funny shapes with a different kind of ball, or throw a tennis ball or whatever the case is. But hopefully we build some strange things out there that kids kind of take a funny look at and want to explore, and that encourages them to grab a club and grab a ball and have a good time with their buddies.
No, on that note, it's been really good of you guys to find time to talk to me about it. But I can't congratulate you enough, really. What you guys have done there with Nick, and the ethos of the place was fantastic. The Chick-fil-A and the cabins. I secretly hope they never build a clubhouse. I actually think cabin culture is the way forward for these new developments. The cabins are so cool. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. And
I disagree with that, honestly. Yeah. There are a lot of clubs that have these great cabins, and it's a great vibe. You get to hang out with your 3 buddies or your 7 buddies, and you're holed up in your cabin. I kind of hate that. Like, I want everyone to be in the clubhouse. Sandhills to me is the best example. I mean, the cabins there are beautifully situated, but they're nothing fancy. It's a place to sleep. And I much prefer the clubs where everyone wants to be in the clubhouse. Everyone's hanging out together. That's the hub of activity, as opposed to everyone splitting off after golf and going their separate ways.
Oh, yeah. I meant you.
I hope the cabins are really nice. And I think the lodge and all the lodging at Old Barnwell is going to be great, but I still want as many people as possible hanging out together in the clubhouse. I think that's what really creates a great vibe.
I mean the what do you call them? What's there at the moment, the temporary cabin.
Kitty's Castle. You're talking about the temporary clubhouse.
I'm talking about the temporary clubhouse.
Yeah.
I'm a huge clubhouse fan, but I just love those. What do you call them? The like trailers that are built up with anyway, whatever's there at the moment, the pro shop. It's a really nice vibe in there. It's small, it's friendly, it's welcoming. Yeah, that's it. Mobile home. There you go. So, but I mean, it's amazing what you can do with those things to create like a really nice environment without having all the bells and whistles of the clubhouse and stuff. But it's going to go from strength to strength. So really cool. Guys, I really enjoyed that. That was class. Thank you so much for doing it.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, this was fun.
Watch this.